The first time I noticed something was off, it was a Tuesday. We had our weekly marketing sync at 10 a.m., but when I wheeled into the conference room, it was empty, lights off, chairs untouched. I checked my calendar again. The meeting had moved. No update, no email, no message, just gone. I found the team huddled in Gavin's office, halfway through the discussion. "Oh, Lena, we didn't want to disturb you," he said with that tight smile he used when he was trying to sound thoughtful but didn't quite get there. I brushed it off. Things happen. Calendars glitch. People forget. But then it happened again. Then again. I'm Lena, by the way, 32, senior marketing strategist, and one of the highest performing employees at Briar Slate, the mid-size firm where I'd worked for the last 5 years. I've been in a wheelchair since a spinal cord injury in my early 20s. People love to describe me as inspirational in that performative, slightly patronizing way that makes me want to hand them a thesaurus. I'm not a hero. I'm just really, really good at my job. Or at least I was. Until I started getting left off projects I normally led. A campaign pitch I developed was handed off to a junior associate to give them more experience. Brainstorm sessions I was supposed to lead were moved last minute to locations I couldn't access. The company had been remote during COVID, and back then, everything was seamless. But now, as they returned to in-person, suddenly, my presence was inconvenient, a logistical oversight, a scheduling conflict. I wasn't paranoid. I was paying attention. My performance reviews hadn't changed, still exceeds expectations. Clients still emailed me directly with praise, but inside the office, things shifted like sand under my wheels. It was in the way Gavin avoided eye contact in meetings, how coworkers stopped inviting me to lunch. Subtle, strategic. The kind of exclusion you couldn't easily point to without sounding overly sensitive. So I didn't point. Not yet. I took notes. I saved emails. I smiled, kept doing my job, and made myself invisible enough to observe everything, because I knew what was coming. I just needed proof. It was the cleaning crew's vacuum that saved me. I'd stayed late finalizing a media brief. The office was nearly empty, lights dim, floor quiet, when I heard voices drifting from the glass-walled HR conference room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when someone says your name, you listen. Lena's presence makes people uncomfortable, Gavin said. My breath caught, but I didn't move. She's competent, HR replied, voice lower, cautious. But there have been concerns. Team cohesion, energy, optics. I gripped the wheels of my chair, pulse steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Optics. Gavin exhaled like the weight of my existence exhausted him. We've tried, but the wheelchair, it's a visual distraction. Clients fixate on it. And the team, look, nobody wants to be the bad guy here, but it's disruptive. Disruptive. 12-hour days, top-performing metrics, my client renewal rate the highest in the department. But to them, my body was noise. My wheelchair was clutter. I stayed hidden in the alcove near the printer, half shielded by a fake ficus and my own rage. They talked a little longer about how they'd ease me out, about severance optics, about not triggering a PR issue. Then the door opened and I slipped down the hall like a shadow. My apartment felt too quiet when I got home. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I made a folder. I labeled it Insurance. Inside, I pasted every positive performance review, every client testimonial, screenshots of Slack conversations where I was praised, every rescheduled meeting, every email that subtly erased me. I wasn't angry, not yet, just clear. This wasn't about my performance. This was about perception, about bias so ingrained they'd convinced themselves they were being respectful by planning my exit in hushed tones after hours. I didn't confront Gavin. Not then. Confrontation gives them time to prepare. I just smiled the next morning, wheeled into my office like nothing had changed, and kept collecting data. Because the thing about being underestimated is that people don't realize when you've already started planning your counterattack. And Gavin? He had no idea what was coming. The write-up landed on my desk like a punchline without a joke. Missed deadlines, it read. Lack of collaboration, diminished team morale. I stared at the HR form, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Missed deadlines? I was still submitting deliverables a day early. Lack of collaboration? I'd been removed from the last 3 projects. Diminished morale? What did that even mean? Gavin didn't look at me as he handed it over. Just a formality, he said casually, flipping through papers like this was just another Tuesday. Nothing to worry about. I signed nothing, said nothing, just nodded because this wasn't the time to fight. Not yet. A week later, the quarterly team retreat was announced. 3 days at a lakeside resort with workshops, networking mixers, and the usual forced bonding nonsense. My invite never came. When I asked about it, Gavin blinked like I was being dramatic. We didn't think it would be accessible enough for you, Lena. The grounds are pretty uneven. I raised an eyebrow. And you didn't think to ask me? He shrugged. We didn't want to put you in an uncomfortable situation. Uncomfortable for me? Or for them? That same week, people stopped making eye contact. Lunchtime conversations quieted when I rolled in. One colleague who used to swing by daily to ask for brainstorming help suddenly didn't respond to messages. Another mentioned how she wished the office didn't feel so tense lately. Tense. It wasn't my presence that made them uncomfortable. It was their guilt, their complicity, their silence. I became the problem they wanted to disappear, not because I was failing, but because I refused to shrink, because my wheelchair reminded them of something they didn't want to see, their own ableism dressed up in HR speak and faux concern. I documented everything, the write-up, the retreat, the shift in office dynamics. I saved every passive-aggressive Slack message, every calendar removal, every awkward smile that said, "I'm sorry, but not sorry." They were tightening the noose. What they didn't realize is I was building the case. And if Gavin thought this setup would end in silence, he'd severely underestimated the woman he was trying to erase. They waited until the Monday meeting to make it official. The conference room was packed, the kind of full-body attendance usually reserved for birthdays or layoffs. Gavin stood at the front, sleeves rolled, the picture of corporate sincerity. I knew something was coming. The buzz in the office had been too calculated, the energy too artificial. I sat at the end of the table, notebook open, pen ready, always prepared, always professional. I just want to take a moment to recognize Lena, Gavin began, looking at me like I was a goldfish that had learned to jump through hoops. She's been such an inspirational spirit to all of us. Inspirational, not smart, not strategic, not irreplaceable, just inspirational. There was a beat of silence before he continued. But after much consideration and discussions with HR, we've decided it's best for the team that Lena steps away from her role, effective immediately. A few people gasped. Most didn't. They already knew. Gavin cleared his throat. This isn't disciplinary, it's preventative. We've received feedback that your presence, while deeply respected, has unintentionally created discomfort among some team members. Discomfort, that word again. It was never about performance. It was about perception. I didn't fit their aesthetic. I didn't match the image they wanted to project to clients. I took up space they didn't want to accommodate. And now they were dressing up discrimination in vague language and fake compassion. I nodded slowly, keeping my face unreadable. Not because I wasn't hurt, of course I was. I'd poured 5 years of my life into this place. Built campaigns that turned dying accounts into flagships, mentored interns who now had offices with views. But I wouldn't give Gavin the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Thank you," I said quietly, closing my notebook. "I'll have my things packed by end of day." He smiled, relieved. He thought I was going to walk away quietly, tail tucked, ego bruised. He thought this would be the last time he heard my name in that building. But Gavin didn't know what I'd been doing for the past few months. He didn't know the file on my desktop titled "Just in Case." He didn't know the fire he'd just lit beneath someone who'd been quietly preparing for war. The day after they let me go, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or rage or fall apart. I sat in my apartment in the same clothes I'd worn to work, my phone silenced, the world muffled. It was quiet, eerily so. The kind of silence that comes right before a storm when the wind stops moving and the air feels charged. I opened my laptop and clicked into the folder I'd labeled Insurance. Emails, Slack messages, screenshots, calendar deletions, audio recordings, the performance reviews where I'd been praised as an essential asset to the team less than 6 months ago. The signed letter Gavin gave me after I'd landed the Kilburn campaign. "You've raised the bar for this entire department." That was before I became an inconvenience, before my wheelchair became a threat to their polished image. I scrolled through months of evidence, each item time-stamped, saved, backed up to a private drive. I had everything, every strategic exclusion, every coded insult disguised as concern. Every time they told me something was for my comfort when it was really about theirs. I'd never been one for confrontation. But this wasn't confrontation. This was correction. I opened a new tab and searched for ADA employment lawyers in the city. A name came up immediately. Nora Ellison. Fierce, experienced, known for winning the cases no one else would touch. Her firm had taken down bigger companies than Briar and Slate. I clicked contact. Her assistant called me back within the hour. "Ms. Ellison has availability tomorrow morning. She asked me to tell you she's already read your blog post." Right, the blog. I'd written it late last night, half from adrenaline, half from exhaustion. No names, just the truth, a few hundred words. It had already been shared over 4,000 times. The storm wasn't coming. I was the storm. Nora Ellison didn't look like a lawyer out of a movie. No designer heels, no stiff smile, just a sharp-eyed woman in a charcoal blazer and flats, her laptop already open by the time I wheeled into her office. "I read everything," she said, skipping small talk. "You've got a case, a good one." We went through it all. My documentation, the blog, the write-up, the retreat, the final meeting. She asked questions. Took notes, didn't flinch once. She only paused when I showed her the audio recording, the one where Gavin used the word disruptive. "Jesus," she muttered, "this is textbook ADA retaliation." By the time I left her office, I had a list of next steps and a pro bono agreement signed and filed. Nora wasn't just interested, she was invested. Over the next week, we quietly began to build the case. A few former coworkers reached out after seeing the blog. 2 of them offered statements. One, a former intern with a mobility impairment, told us she'd been discouraged from applying for a full-time role. Another said he was told to stop inviting me to meetings because Lena slows things down. Every story lined up. Different people. Same patterns. Nora's team subpoenaed HR records. We found discrepancies in timelines, emails accidentally deleted, and one internal Slack thread that included the phrase, "She's a liability if we keep accommodating her." Gavin had written it himself. I felt a strange calm settle over me with every piece of damning evidence. Not triumph, not anger, just clarity. They hadn't just fired me, they'd targeted me. Systematically. Strategically. And now they'd get to explain it to a judge. Nora's words from that first meeting stayed with me. "You don't need to burn the building down, Lena. You just need to shine enough light to show the cracks." And cracks? They had plenty. I wrote the post in one sitting. It wasn't planned, just instinct. I was staring at the blinking cursor on a blank screen, hands hovering over the keyboard, when the words started pouring out. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers. Just told the truth. I was fired because my wheelchair made other people uncomfortable, Not because I couldn't do my job, but because I did it too well and still didn't fit the image they wanted to project. I posted it on a blog I'd created that morning. No profile photo, no bio, just the story. By noon, it had 3,000 views. By the end of the week, it had over 100,000. Emails started rolling in, some from strangers who said, "Same thing happened to me." Others from people who just wanted to say they saw me, they believed me, that I wasn't alone. There was power in that. Validation from people I'd never met, from people who'd fought the same silent battles in different offices across the country. I watched it unfold like an outsider, the way someone might watch a wave gather on the horizon, quietly, steadily, then all at once. I didn't say the company's name. Not yet. The internet has a way of doing that on its own. But even without naming Briar and Slate, people in the industry were already whispering. The tone shifted. Coworkers who hadn't said a word when I was escorted out suddenly reached out with supportive texts. One even asked if I'd consider taking the post down for the sake of the company's reputation. I didn't respond. I wasn't writing for them. I was writing for the woman who'd been told to be grateful for the job that exploited her, for the man who was passed over for promotion because he needed a screen reader, for every person who'd ever been called inspirational instead of qualified. The blog wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of theirs. 3 days after the blog went viral, I got an email with the subject line, "We see you, and we've got your back." It was from the National Coalition for Disability Equity, a nonprofit I'd followed for years. They offered legal resources, public relations support, and a media liaison. "If you're ready to go public," the email said, "we're ready to help." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't afraid. I was just calculating. Timing mattered. Truth was powerful, but strategy made it bulletproof. Meanwhile, the cracks at Briar and Slate deepened. I knew something had shifted when someone in HR viewed my LinkedIn profile 3 times in one day. Then came the subtle edits to their company website. Suddenly, they were very interested in highlighting their inclusive workplace culture. A new blog post about accessibility initiatives. An old photo of me speaking at a company event mysteriously vanished from their media gallery. Too late. Journalists started reaching out. First 1, then 3, then a dozen. Most of them wanted to talk off the record. "We know who the company is," one of them said. "You didn't have to name them. The breadcrumbs were all there." Still, I didn't give them the full story. Not yet. But I gave them the tone. I told them what it felt like to be erased in real time, to watch your career get reassigned to people less qualified, less experienced, but more palatable. I gave them the story without the logo, the story that too many people already knew by heart. Nora was thrilled. "They're already panicking," she said during our strategy call. "We're getting emails from their lawyers trying to open dialogue before things escalate." I smiled. Let them squirm. Let them scramble for spin. Because here's the thing about companies that build their image on buzzwords instead of behavior. They're never prepared for actual accountability. Their brand was built on illusion. Mine was built on facts, on records, on receipts. They tried to fire me quietly. Now the world was starting to listen, loudly. And Gavin, he hadn't even heard the worst part yet. We filed on a Wednesday morning. The paperwork was thick, precise, methodical. Nora slid the final stack across the conference table, her expression razor-sharp beneath calm professionalism. A DA violations, wrongful termination, retaliation, hostile work environment, she said, ticking them off with quiet satisfaction. They didn't just cross a line, they danced on it. I signed without hesitation. The lawsuit wasn't just about me anymore. It was about precedent, about every whisper behind office doors that never got documented, about every carefully worded email hiding discriminatory intent behind bureaucratic language, about people like Gavin thinking they could mistreat someone as long as they smiled while doing it. "This won't be a quiet settlement," Nora warned, though she already knew my answer. They're going to offer you money, a nice check to make this disappear. I nodded once. Let them try. She smiled. Good, because we're going public. Within hours, the news was out. Former Briar Slate employee files federal discrimination suit. My name wasn't anonymous anymore, and neither was theirs. It was on the record. Court documents, interviews, statements. My blog became a press hub overnight. Reporters started calling Nora's office directly. Disability rights activists launched hashtag campaigns. Clients of Briar Slate began asking questions they didn't have prepared answers for. And I was just getting started. There's a moment in every storm when the wind shifts, when people realize they're not watching it from a safe distance. They're in it. That moment had arrived. And Gavin? He was still holding an umbrella made of paper. By Friday, things were unraveling inside Briar Slate. An anonymous email leaked to the press, internal chatter, Slack screenshots, a forwarded memo from Gavin titled Damage Control Messaging. In it, he described my blog as a one-sided narrative and warned staff not to engage with reporters. It read like a man trying to plug holes in a sinking ship using motivational quotes and office donuts. One particular line made it to Twitter and exploded. We cannot let a former employee's disability narrative overshadow our inclusive branding. It trended for 3 days under the hashtag Disability is not a storyline. Meanwhile, Nora and I got an email. Subject, settlement offer. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a dollar figure and a suggestion that we put this behind us and move forward. It was laughably low. I imagined Gavin in his glass office, pacing, thinking this was a generous gesture, thinking I'd fold. I sent a one-line response. We'll see you in court. That same afternoon, a senior executive reached out through a back channel, someone I'd once considered a mentor. She asked if I'd be willing to de-escalate the situation for the sake of company morale. I asked her if she wanted me to send her the audio of Gavin calling me a liability. She hung up. They didn't want resolution. They wanted silence. They wanted the optics of inclusion without the effort. But this time, they weren't getting it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. And if they thought a lowball offer was going to buy back the image they burned to the ground, they hadn't been paying attention. Not to me. Not to the movement they accidentally helped ignite. I didn't plan on becoming a headline. But by the time my blog hit 1 million views, it was inevitable. The exclusive interview came from a journalist I trusted, someone who didn't want a tragedy narrative or a polished PR spin. She wanted the facts, the nuance, the strategy behind the smile. We met in a quiet cafe, off the record at first. By the time we hit record, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The article dropped on a Monday morning, fired for her wheelchair, the woman holding corporate America accountable. My name was in the title. So was the company's. It hit the front page within hours. Cable news picked it up by noon, podcasts, Twitter threads, TikToks, breaking down the case. Suddenly, I wasn't just a former employee. I was a story, and I wasn't alone. Former employees started speaking up, some publicly, others through private statements to Nora's office. One woman described being denied promotions after disclosing a chronic illness. Another shared how her ergonomic requests were ignored until she resigned from burnout. One man admitted he quit after being told to stop requesting special treatment when he asked for a screen reader. The pieces fit together like a puzzle they'd never expected anyone to finish. Briar Slate released a statement. Vague, empty, the usual. We take these allegations seriously and are committed to diversity. But their silence about specifics only made them look more guilty. The truth was out. It was loud. It was multiplying. And Gavin? He hadn't said a word. He was probably hoping the PR team could still fix it. But the storm wasn't just overhead anymore. It was inside the building. The first client to pull out was a healthcare group, then a luxury retailer. By the end of the week, 5 of Briar Slate's top accounts had terminated their contracts, pending further investigation. Investors started asking questions the board couldn't answer. Stocks dipped. Quietly, the leadership team hired a crisis management firm. Louder, the internet called them out for it. Then came the internal audit. Leaked to the press before it was even finalized, the preliminary report revealed a pattern. Complaints never followed up on, accessibility requests labeled non-essential, and one HR email chain that included the phrase, optics over action. It wasn't just about me anymore, and it was systemic. By Friday, Gavin was suspended pending review. HR issued a damage control memo thanking him for his years of leadership. No apology, no responsibility, just silence wrapped in corporate padding. It didn't work. Employees started organizing. An open letter was signed by nearly half the staff, demanding structural reform, leadership resignations, and independent oversight. It was posted on LinkedIn, then Medium, then Forbes. Nora sent me a single line after reading it. "They cracked the dam, Lena. You blew it wide open." An independent investigation was launched. Former executives were subpoenaed. A civil rights watchdog agency filed a parallel inquiry. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, coffee in hand, laptop glowing with notifications. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about visibility. Gavin once told HR I was disruptive. He had no idea how right he was. Court wasn't like the movies. No gasps from the gallery, no slamming gavels, just the steady hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, and the sound of someone finally being held accountable. Gavin sat 2 tables away, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit and a nervous smile that didn't quite land. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown in ways he couldn't measure. My lawyer, Nora, moved like she was born in a courtroom, precise, calm, surgical. We opened with the audio recordings, the emails, the calendar exclusions, the write-up, the discomfort memo. Piece by piece, the narrative unfolded. It wasn't a story of a single act of discrimination. It was a timeline, a pattern, a system. Witness after witness confirmed it. A former intern, an ex-manager, even a current employee who risked their job to testify. The same phrases repeated like a chorus, made uncomfortable, told to stop inviting her. Accommodations were inconvenient. When it was Gavin's turn on the stand, he tried to perform calm. He really did, but his voice wavered. His memory suddenly failed. And under cross-examination, when asked directly if he believed my wheelchair had influenced his decisions, he hesitated just long enough to confirm everything. Silence hung heavy in the room when Nora rested our case. The jury didn't take long, less than 2 hours. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts of wrongful termination and ADA discrimination, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath for months without realizing it. Gavin didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. He wasn't the point. The settlement was significant, more than anyone expected, enough to walk away, start fresh, and never look back. But I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to build something. I used a portion of the money to launch Access Forward, a nonprofit dedicated to helping disabled professionals navigate hostile workplaces, know their rights, and fight back with facts, documentation, and strategy. Not just support, but action. We offered resources, legal guidance, corporate training programs, and something else. A loud, unflinching presence in a world that often preferred our silence. The day Gavin was officially fired from Briar Slate, I was speaking at a panel on workplace inclusion. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the full circle moment when a young woman approached me afterward and whispered, "Your story gave me the courage to quit a job that was crushing me." That was the real victory. Not just the courtroom, not just the headlines, but the ripple effect. People like Gavin think disability is weakness. What they never understand is that surviving in a world that constantly tries to minimize you builds a kind of strength they've never known. And now, we weren't just surviving, we were leading. 1 year later, I rolled onto the stage to a standing ovation. Not because I'd won a lawsuit, not because of the headlines, but because I'd turned survival into strategy, and strategy into something louder than revenge, change. The auditorium was packed. The Global Business Summit on Leadership and Equity, the kind of stage they once told me people like me weren't the right fit for. Now I was the keynote speaker. My name was printed in bold across programs, my face on banners beside executives and founders I used to study from a distance. I adjusted the mic, took a slow breath, and looked out at the crowd. I was once told, I began, that my presence made others uncomfortable. Not because of what I said, not because of how I worked, but simply because of what they saw when I entered a room. I let that land. But discomfort, I continued, is often the first sign that something needs to change, and sometimes the loudest disruption is simply refusing to disappear. Applause rippled through the room, but I wasn't performing, I was remembering. The Lena who sat in her apartment at midnight, piecing together a digital trail of quiet erasure. The Lena who signed a legal document with hands that didn't tremble. The Lena who looked into a courtroom of strangers and told the truth with clarity, not spite. That version of me was still here, just louder now. After the session, a woman in a navy suit approached, Briar Slate's new PR director. "We'd love to partner with Access Forward," she said smoothly. "Help rebuild our reputation." I smiled, professional but unmoved. "We're fully booked through next year," I said gently, "but feel free to apply through the intake form." She blinked, unsure if she'd been dismissed or redirected. The answer was both. Later that night, I returned to my hotel room, opened my laptop. Another message from a young professional, newly disabled, newly navigating the maze of corporate microaggressions. "Your blog saved me," it read. "Now I'm documenting everything." I replied simply, "Good, keep the receipts, and keep going." Because the comeback wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who'd ever been told to shrink. And now, we were expanding. Louder, smarter, unstoppable.